Can you all hear me? Could I please ask you to take a seat and slowly lowering down your voice so that we can start our conversation today? That's lovely. Thank you very much. We only have 1 hour. I think the conversation is going to be extremely interesting. So I would rather start and welcome you all to this dialogue. I would like to seize the opportunity to thank Mario, his group, and the University of Vigo for this opportunity, which is unique. Maybe I should say just a couple of words about myself. It's very unlikely that anyone in the audience would know me, because that's not my academic field. I am Vincenzo Pavone. I am a researcher, possibly as an STS scholar, with an old-fashioned leaning on political economy and an even more old-fashioned background in political science and political theory. But I am very interested in what's going on here, and like you, I am looking forward to learn more about plastics and the politics of the plastic industry and other aggressive materials. We're going to talk today precisely about this issue, and we will address the kind of problems that plastics produces. They are outside us, they are inside us. We better know more about them. But we'll also talk about the technologies and the policies that have been so far implemented to address this issue. The session will conclude with a full review of available alternatives, especially from anti-capitalist and degrowth perspectives. In order to address all of that, we have here two amazing scholars that I'm going to introduce very quickly, because I want to give them some opportunity to tell more about their trajectory. We have here connected online Alice Ma, who is a professor of urban and environmental studies at the University of Glasgow. Her research and teaching contributions focus on toxic pollution, environmental justice, sustainable transformation, and anti-colonial ecological alternatives and futures. And here with us, we have Ekaterina Chertkovskaya, who is a researcher based at Lund University in Sweden, working on degrowth and critical organization studies. Her work addresses the crisis created by capitalism, and there are many, neoliberalism and the pursuit of economic growth, and interestingly explores paths for socio-ecological transformations. Now, starting with Alice, I want to know more about you and your trajectory. I know that as scholars, we are restless for some problems, issues that keep us awake at night and lead us into our academic path. So my question is, what leads you here and your trajectory around the studies of toxic pollution and environmental justice? Can you tell us more about this?
Thank you so much for the introduction.
Alice,
and
we don't hear her. Just a sec.
Sorry, you can't hear me?
Try again.
Can you hear me now?
Yep. Go ahead.
Yeah. Can you still hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, good. So thank you so much for the introduction and the invitation. It's really a pleasure and honor to be here, and I wish I could join you in person. So I've been researching the petrochemical industry, which is the major producer of plastics. 80% of what the petrochemical industry makes is plastic. From an environmental justice perspective for the past decade, part of a large European funded project with a team trying to understand the industry as a whole, actually from a political economy perspective in many ways, who the key polluters are, how the industry works, what are the regulations, what are the pressure points, and how different environmental justice communities, like people who live on the fence line of industry, have suffered the consequences of the uneven burdens of pollution. Looking at places in different parts of the world, but focusing in particular on the biggest producers and consumers of petrochemicals and plastics in the United States, Europe, and China. And so what brought me here is that the closer and harder I looked at this very damaging and out of control industry, which endlessly seeks growth, the more I came around basically to the idea that all we need to mandate for really is degrowth in this industry. And I was very inspired by a lot of the work of many of you here in the conference, this idea that we need to challenge the perpetual pursuit of extractive GDP-driven growth, reduce consumption, live well with less, and foster new modes of living, working, and being. So that's why I'm here. I think that degrowth seems to be really the only perspective that simultaneously addresses these crises of out-of-control greenhouse gas emissions, overconsumption, pollution, and waste, which is they're all things that are at the heart of this very inherently destructive industry, but which deems itself essential and which we do all rely on because it's so materially embedded. But I think that degrowth, at least from what I've read and engaged with, it lacks some detail about the paths forward, especially for confronting a dominant industry. A lot of the degrowth debates are kind of on the margins, which is great. But what I'm really interested in is sort of staying with how you transform a dominant and oppressive industry that we're all entangled with, and see how we can push those degrowth debates further.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Huh? Okay, thank you, Alice. I'll ask the same question to you, Ekaterina. What keeps you restless and what brought you here?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. So, yes, I basically have been working on degrowth quite some time, so I really feel, so being a degrowther is my identity, let's say. So, and it's about 10 years that I have been doing this already. So since the famous Leipzig conference that maybe many of you have been to or have heard of. So really since then I have been kind of, all my work has been framed around degrowth. So it's a really key term that I think with when doing research, but also of course in my life and beyond research also. So, and I have been thinking about degrowth quite a lot conceptually. So, for example, we have edited a book on political economy of degrowth together with Stefania Barka and Alexander Paulson. Or more recently, I have been thinking about strategies in relation to degrowth, and it's actually straight from a session on strategy that I'm coming into here. So, but the kind of empirical focus of my work currently, so it is the plastic crisis. And I would say that I think always when researching the plastic crisis, I think about degrowth, but it's not always that I bring the two explicitly together. So it's very exciting to be able to do this here at the conference and in the session. And also we have quite a strong research team, let's say, at Lund, based at different departments working on plastics. And many of us are really fond of Alice's work. So it's very nice to be in conversation today.
Thank you very much. Can we have the next slide? Now, I think we should just address the issue head on. And so my question first to Ekaterina is very simple. What are the main problems with plastics and why should we be worried about it?
Yes.
Your heart.
So maybe, I also don't know what is the kind of familiarity with the issue, but it's good to kind of always go through the basics. So maybe some of you are really aware about these things, and plastics is something that is discussed quite a lot in the public and the media, in the policies, but also I think that it's important kind of the issues of framing, so how the problems with plastics, or what I would call the plastic crisis, is framed. So for me, we can say that we are facing a global plastic crisis, and it has two elements or two key kind of symptoms. So one is the pollution of natural environments, so lands and oceans, and the other is plastic's contribution to the rising greenhouse gas emissions. So, and I would say that it's kind of the former that is emphasized more, especially ocean pollution. So that's really something that is at the forefront when we talk about the problems with plastics. And even sometimes it is referred to as the kind of global plastic pollution crisis. But for me, it's really kind of a double-edged sword, let's say, so a double issue, so both of the pollution and of contribution to the climate emergency. So, and I think we should be emphasizing both when discussing this. So usually, so what we would emphasize when saying what are the problems with plastic, so basically it is a material that is ubiquitous, that we find it wherever we are, and it makes up a lot of kind of useful things that we need, but also it makes up a lot of things that we really don't need. So, and actually about 40% of plastics is packaging made for single or short-term uses. So it's really a material and kind of the products out of it that are made to be wasted. And then also so maybe also some of you would know it very well, but the rates of recycling of plastics are very, very low. So it's 9% globally, so, and 10% of that, 9%, has been recycled more than once. So really kind of very short-term life cycle of this material, which largely ends up in landfills and natural environments. So this is why there has been such a big emphasis on plastic pollution. So, but then the other issue is that plastics is really a 99% fossil-based and fossil-dependent material, relying on the extraction of oil, gas, and coal for its production. And there is some sort of discussion of bioplastics or things like this, but it really kind of 99% of plastics is fossil-based. So, and its contribution to the greenhouse gas emissions is not insignificant, so I think it's about 4.5%, but also out of this kind of basic materials, so the bulk materials that plastics is part of, so plastics has been growing a lot, so more than the other problematic materials, and also hence its contribution to the greenhouse gas emissions is projected to grow to 10-15% of the remaining carbon budget by 2040, I think. So basically these two kind of symptoms I would really emphasize when discussing the problems with plastics, but also there is kind of a root cause to that. And the root cause is production and capital accumulation. So, and I think that this is also something that is emphasized by some actors, but often the framing is around kind of other issues. So very often consumption is seen as a problem, blaming individuals, consumers, for disposing wrongly of their waste. Or often this is also seen as a problem of waste mismanagement, blaming the Global South for kind of not managing their waste properly and neglecting the reality that basically what on paper in the European or Western countries looks as recycling actually leads to being dumped in the countries of the Global South. So basically these are the kind of issues of the framing that are problematic, and I think that it's really important to kind of frame the plastic crisis as the crisis of capital accumulation and production, so which brings it close to degrowth discussions.
All right, thank you. Thank you for problematizing the framing of the root causes of the plastic crisis. I think that's very important, and emphasizing both the contribution to greenhouses, gas emission, and pollution as it's seen some. But I would like to know more about the issue of toxicity, and I think Alice could help us with that. Could you hear? Yes, great. Can you tell us more about the issue of toxicity, which is another key element of the plastic crisis?
Yeah, thank you very much. I absolutely agree with Ekaterina's comment about the root causes being production. So, I mean, the key problem with plastics from a point of view of sustainability or reducing is that every stage of the plastics life cycle, from extraction through to refining to consumption and waste, poses significant risks to human health. Basically, there's no way of getting rid of the toxicity. It's inherent within the plastics. There's none that isn't. Even the byproducts have it. And I think thinking about that exponential growth of plastics is really alarming, given, as you can see in the chart, it's been rising exponentially since the end of the Second World War. This is a manufactured need rather than one that emerged organically, and it's set to continue. So all these figures about greenhouse gas emissions and their toxic consequences are set to increase despite the fact that there's a lot of anti-plastics movement. So all of the plastic waste projections are, in the ocean is expected to nearly triple by 2040 to 29 million tons a year. So yeah, just a brief stop tour between some, probably many of you know, but plastic production releases toxic substances that are linked to cancer, neurological damage, reproductive and developmental problems. According to scientists, plastic and chemical, like toxic petrochemical pollution has recently crossed a planetary boundary, which poses a risk to the stability of Earth systems. And it intersects with climate crisis and biodiversity loss and toxicity. So they all kind of percolate together. Around the world, the burdens of these toxic hazards are disproportionately concentrated in racialized and minority communities. And this material never breaks down. It gets into all of our ecosystems. There's current, debates around forever chemicals that are in our rainwater. Microplastics are getting into our food chains. It's, as you discussed in the introduction, it's in our bodies, it's in our places, it's in our ecosystems, it's in our lives. And so I think these problems, as Ekaterina pointed out very well, of climate as well as toxicity are one of the really difficult issues with this industry. It's one of the top 4 difficult to decarbonize industrial sectors. And the costs to the planet and to our health are incalculable. So production needs to be considerably scaled back.
All right, that's great. Yes, can you? Oh, all right, thanks. Okay, Alice, next question, I'll have you start. And it will be more, what are the measures, technologies, policies, initiatives that have been implemented so far to address the problem? Can you tell us something about that? Next.
Yes, thank you. I certainly can't tell you everything. I would start by saying that there's no shortage of practical solutions that are being proposed to the plastics crisis. So it's percolated to the top of agendas. That nearly 150 countries have some form of legislation to phase out single-use plastics. So there's bans, there's various regulations and agreements to restrict things that cause marine pollution. There's lots of circular economy schemes which are about reduction, all the R's, reduction, reuse, trying to keep things circular so that there's no waste, or there's less waste. And so these are all, I would say, quite familiar to many environmentalists. So this idea that you're promoting these different R's, you're preventing leakage through responsible waste management, this idea of decoupling fossil fuel extraction from plastics to make it more circular, to make it better. These are all the ways in which I think a lot of the solutions on the part of governments, local authorities, NGOs as well, and policymakers, that's what they're trying to do. And I think the problem, as you might guess, that this is a sort of a theme, is that most of these don't address the idea of reducing actual production, because they rely on this idea that if you just recycle it, then you can keep producing it. So some of the key, probably many of you are also aware that although the governments have plastics is very fragmented, it's very uncoordinated, it's uneven, there's a lot of problems with it. But in recent years, starting with the sort of flagship agreement in 2022 in Nairobi, there's been an agreement to have a UN Global Plastics Treaty on plastic pollution. It's still in very early stages, subject to a lot of intense negotiation. Many environmentalists have celebrated it as a step, a really important step, kind of like the first COP for climate change, to looking at plastics across the whole life cycle, looking at many of these difficult issues. But there's also a lot of industry lobbying, a lot of pressure to keep the issues more focused on managing waste rather than production, for example. And other kinds of initiatives have been around banning toxic chemicals, actually. So around the same time in 2022, the European Union unveiled plans for the largest ever ban on chemicals, which would include whole classes of them, like flame retardants, bisphenols, PVC, PFAS, forever chemicals, and polyfluoroalkyl substances. And then last year, they published a dossier outlining a ban of 10,000 PFAS chemicals found in everything from cosmetics to rainwear, mobile phones. And the US has followed suit in a much smaller way. So there are a number of kind of technologies and ideas that are being thrown at the problem, but I would say the common theme is that they don't really get at the issue of production.
Okay, thank you. I mean, that means that probably the very core of the problem has not been addressed. But thank you for outlining the main direction that has been taken so far. Ekaterina, what would you like to add on that?
Yeah, so I would totally agree that, so there has been quite a lot of policy discussion and action on plastics, but we have, with co-authors, framed it as that this is characterized by illusions of containment, control and cleanup. So there is this idea that there are some kind of technologies that will be run by artificial intelligence, will be able to clean up the mess. And for example, this giant gyres, ocean gyres with full of plastics. So, which is definitely not the case, and this is definitely not going to work. And also it's quite impressive how much kind of discussion and also funding is going into that direction. So when we look at the funding of alternatives, so something we will discuss later, it is quite minuscule, but when you look at this kind of massive projects with massive technologies and technological infrastructures, they often get millions and millions of euros in funding. So, and I would say again that, yeah, so Alice emphasized the lobbyists that are very present at the plastics treaty negotiations. So there is a nice visualization of it, how they really outnumber the small states, the indigenous groups, and also the scientist coalition. And also it's, yeah, kind of going back to, I didn't name the organizations responsible for the plastic crisis, but you see them here. So it's basically the key companies of the petrochemical industry and also the kind of corporations that are specializing on, let's say, fast-moving consumer goods. But I think what I would like maybe to highlight here is the connection to degrowth, because it's kind of interesting. So the more progressive, let's say, forces pushing for, let's say, an alternative plastic treaty, so some social movements, indigenous groups, NGOs, and the scientist coalition, so they're really calling for a cap on production of plastics. So, and I think it's very rare when we discuss kind of particular industries or spheres that there is kind of an agreement around capping production from certain groups, let's say, who are heavily involved in the process. So many would agree that it is necessary to go in that direction. But at the same time, in the degrowth spaces, we have not addressed plastics enough, I would say. So that's something that is barely present in our discussions. But perhaps there is a space to build alliances. We like speaking of building alliances in degrowth, because there is, yeah, so the kind of the tough or the agreement among some people that policies should be tougher and at the same time, the kind of public support of it, because there are some surveys that have the opinion of many people, and actually like 8 out of 10 people would support much more ambitious and stronger policies in relation to plastics. So I think that kind of degrowthers should be part of this discussion. That is point one, but maybe point two is that also we should discuss not only plastics, but other aggressive or problematic materials that we are not addressing so much in this session, but steel, concrete, paper. I know that there are struggles against the extension of the cellulose factory here in Galicia, so these are all important issues because they address the kinds of materials that maybe are not often in the spotlight, but they are problematic and they need to be changed, challenged, transformed.
Thank you. That's very important. We should not forget it's not only plastic. I think you're absolutely right. We are surrounded by a number of materials that are aggressive in many different ways. We move on to the last question, which is possibly the most salient, the most interesting one, in a way, because I think we all here ask ourselves whether there are different ways of addressing this crisis, whether we can think of a different way of approaching it, possibly starting from degrowth, from anti-capitalist perspectives, and that's what we are going to talk about right now. We'll have Alice to start on this. So, what are the alternatives?
Thank you. So I wanted to just start by saying, you know, what Ekaterina mentioned about those groups that are campaigning for cap on production, like the Break Free from Plastic movement, growing out of an anti-incinerator movement in the global south, particularly Southeast Asia. That's a source of inspiration for me, and the idea of building alliances. So I think in some ways, in a space that's quite pessimistic in general, I would say, it's important to think that and to take reassurance that there are people out there who are increasingly calling for more degrowth types of perspectives. So my perspective is perhaps going to be a tiny little bit more philosophical in the sense that in my research, what I found again and again is that there are enduring toxic injustices that are replicated. So if you look back through history, the first movements against petrochemical pollution in Cancer Alley in Louisiana, those happened in the 1980s. They're still happening now, although burdens might be shifted, like through a court case or through active action. Basically, what ends up happening is that hazards are displaced onto other vulnerable communities. So this is this idea that the perpetual displacement of harm to different communities around the globe, which happens with pollution and which happens with what you call aggressive materials, this underscores the limitation of the widely used environmental justice concept of the sacrifice zone to describe these places. So as environmental justice scholar David Pellow argues, entire populations are viewed as expendable within society, not just particular localized communities and spaces. And so the implication of a sacrifice zone is that one could presumably move away to safety, but the implication of this idea of expendability, which is what he argues is the kind of dominant paradigm of within capitalism and colonialism and racism, is that there's no escape. So in my research, I kind of started to focus on, and what I saw, I didn't project it onto that, emerging yet fragile possibilities for fence line communities who are facing enduring toxic injustice to put additional pressure on the industry through what I call multi-scalar activism. In this form of activism, the environmental justice issues beyond the local toxic effects of industry, such as climate justice, plastic waste, urban smog, systemic racism, and land rights, those broaden out the basis of for community resistance. So, for example, fighting together against a pipeline which intersects with a plastics producer space, indigenous communities, African American communities coming together when they haven't worked together in the past. farmers or even with people who might be quite far from their goals politically. And this does link to strong traditions of alliances within many environmental movements, but it's also this idea that it's sort of a planetary possibility or phenomenon. I think, like, going to the little image I have, I just wanted to leave you with one idea about, which is maybe a bit more philosophical, which is this idea about tipping points. So it's about a theory of change, like what are the possibilities for radical transformation? How do we avoid being locked into this sort of, I don't know, David and Goliath kinds of struggles that keep repeating those failures and the displacement of harm? There's no mandate for scaling back the industry. If we keep trying to push against the dominant paradigms, will we always fall back? And I think there's different ways that which you could envisage this happening. So in the book, Facing the Planetary, the political theorist William Connolly envisages a politics of swarming, thus the swarm emerging organically in response to the environmental crisis, which resembles the swarm of birds and is composed of multiple constituencies, regions, levels, and modes of action, each carrying some potential to augment and intensify the others with which it becomes associated. So I think this might be how an alternative planetary petrochemical or plastics politics that's not based on that anymore might come together through synchronicity, which occurs naturally in complex systems, such as when fireflies light up with others at the same time. But on the other hand, there's a real risk that toxic injustice will persist and it might tip the other way unless we address the roots of systemic inequality. So I think that to do so requires constant struggle, multiscalar forms of resistance to the destructive forces of fossil fuel expansion, but also working not only with the destructive side and being sad or angry about that, but working to regenerate communities and ecologies, as many in the degrowth movement do on the in the commons for the sake of past, present, and future generations.
Hopeful, yes. Swarming, I like this image, I have to say. Okay, I would like to know Ekaterina's take on this. More hope, more opportunities?
Yes, thank you. I hope so. So, and here also my kind of, so the current research that I'm involved in with a very, with a great group, team of people. So we're actually trying to kind of look at the practical examples of that, addressing the plastic crisis, which are beyond the mainstream actors and the mainstream industry. And it basically came out of frustration from my side, like, okay, so what do we do? Because there's this huge, powerful actors that you might feel very small next to, but are there some kind of smaller scale initiatives that maybe then unite and join forces in some ways? So that was the question that, let's say, led to this research. And we started with zero waste stores with colleagues. So, and basically these are the spaces, again, maybe many of you know them and have been to them, which basically reorganize how grocery shopping is done. So you are encouraged to bring your own packaging, and everything is done to avoid the use of plastics, but also packaging and waste more generally. And what we discovered that was interesting, that it was going beyond reorganization of a store and also beyond plastics, but really that the stores that we explored, they were kind of forging connections to other actors around them. So such as the local kind of agroecology farmers, local producers. So, and trying to bring in another way also, well, another things that you would not normally find in the supermarkets into your local store. And it was kind of interesting for us that, okay, they were not explicitly anti-capitalist, or they were not necessarily explicitly connecting themselves to degrowth. But they were not very ready to compromise on their focal points when making some decisions about what the stores would do and about decisions about expansion or collaborating with mainstream actors. So this kind of sticking to their principles was quite core in the stores that we at least were looking at. And also when we interviewed the people who were on the mainstream side, so experts on packaging, European Commission officers, or others, they were so hostile to the very idea of zero-waste stores, really trying to kind of discharge it as naive and so on. So we thought, okay, maybe even if these stores are not explicitly radical, they're onto something, and they're kind of trying to change the system and prefigure something else. So, but then now we have been mapping basically the initiatives around the world, and this is work in progress, so the map is not yet complete, and we're trying to still act on some gaps. But what we found is like an ocean of initiatives around there that try to address the plastic crisis in one way or another. And we looked at them throughout the kind of life cycle of plastics, so production, reuse, and so use phase, and also the recycling and repurposing, as well as governance. And we kind of knew that when it comes to recycling, we will find interesting alternatives because of the strong kind of organization in the Latin American context of recycling into cooperatives, which often combine kind of social and environmental values. Also, a big inspiration for this research was the work of Precious Plastics, which operates in this cosmolocal vision, or design global, manufacture local, so something that is discussed a lot on degrowth. So they have the open source technology for enabling making machines in local spaces to enable local recycling of plastics, and basically it's a community around the world in different places. So here the example is a boat that has been built from plastics in Kenya. So a bigger surprise when looking for the different initiatives for us was the kind of reuse phase or use phase. So the zero waste stores would fall into that category, but I wasn't sure what exactly we would find there. And we found a lot. So we found, for example, a lot of the phasing out initiatives, that's zero waste stores would be classified as that. But we also found a lot of the initiatives that focus on refill. And sometimes it's very simple things, so trying to visualize the existing water infrastructure, say in the city of Venice, and to show that you can use tap water in the city. And we found similar initiatives, for example, in Hong Kong and other places. But also there are kind of a lot of reuse initiatives when some organizations try to organize the kind of circulation of cutlery in, say, a particular city context, and making all the takeaway food the packaging not to be wasted, but this is something that gets reused. And here we found it interesting because a lot of these initiatives, they initiate from municipal kind of projects or from some community projects, but we also saw that they are often overtaken by the more for-profit actors. So in that sense, also kind of the reuse economy can be commodified and co-opted, and this is not the direction that we would like to see from a degrowth perspective, but this is the direction that this might be going into. So, and production was our most difficult category, and we're struggling in terms of, okay, what do we even classify as alternative here? Because a lot of well-minded initiatives, when they try to find some kind of good, real solution and making bio-based, biodegradable film from material, from waste that is available locally, then when they enter the whole landscape of kind of organizing, startup organizing, they are really channeled into the grow or die logics. And it's very hard even for those initiatives that we found that work on cooperative principles, that work on kind of other principles to maintain this value. So either they struggle for funding or they might have to rethink how to, if they have to change some of the core principles that they have. But there are a lot of exciting initiatives there also. So for example, this cooperative based in Saragossa, Ava Coop, that made plates for museum exhibition based on mycelium, so based on fungi. So substituting what usually be kind of multi-layered plastics made to be wasted. So I would say that there are a lot of initiatives out there, and some of them are driven by the principles close to degrowth and close to anti-capitalism, but this is not always the case, and they are often channeled in the problematic political economy that surrounds us. So then the important point here is, okay, we need also to change the system to kind of enable these initiatives to flourish and to go in the direction that is more in line with degrowth and anti-capitalist values.
All right. I think they were both awful views. I think one from the top, in a way, is a swarming idea, and the other one is this invitation not to participate in the use, consumption of plastics, which means reduction in production. I think we can both do both things. I think we still have some time for the audience to ask a few questions. I think there is a lot more to say. Both Alice and Ekaterina surely will be delighted to answer your questions. So maybe take a round of 3, 4. Okay.
Hello. So I'm Stephen from Center for Energy Policy, University of Strathclyde. 2 questions, one very simple one. I want to find out where should we focus in the plastic solution in terms of the downstream or the upstream with regards to the geography, looking at global south and the other part of the world. Because when someone from the global south, there's much issue in dealing with the plastic from the upstream. So obviously you have to deal with it from the aspect of the waste has already been created, right? So that's a challenge. The second one is where to focus much to have an impact on the greenhouse gas emission in terms of the life cycle, because you have production, material production, transportation, and even disposal, and all these are interconnected with different systems, right? So where should we focus to have the greatest impact in terms of emission reduction? Thanks.
Yeah.
Here, my name is Marcel from the Autonomous University of Barcelona. Very direct question. What do you make of plastic offsetting, seeing the blunder of carbon offsetting? Is it going to be a success by companies, or how is it going to end up? Thank you.
One more question, maybe?
Hola? There we go.
This one?
And one more.
And one more.
Sorry, my name is Alejandra Lozano from an NGO called Global Initiative for Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, and my question goes more towards the just transition concept. How do we envision as well solutions in order for the transition and the phase out of plastics not to have adverse consequences for workers, for low-income communities and populations that still rely on these industries? That's one question. And the other question is also related to just transitions, is how do we envision these solutions also not producing other problems? In the sense, I come from Mexico, and I've seen that the phase out of plastics have been replaced by, for instance, the use of carbon or paper. And that also drives other types of environmental problems. So how do we envision solutions that really tackle the problem at the root and not create other alternative problems? I don't know if I would love to gather your thoughts around these issues. Thank you.
Maybe just another one.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Tommaso Luzzati from Italy. Just a comment to Ekaterina. Maybe it's not so true that the growth community is not addressing the plastic issues. Thanks to Mario for the coffee.
Okay.
And the other organizing committee.
Okay, so you want to start first? And then Alice?
Yes, so offsetting definitely will not work. So so I would say that a lot of focus in discussion of plastics has been on the downstream, so recycling, waste mismanagement, and so on. So, but I would really say that the upstream needs to be much more in the spotlight. So that is the petrochemical industry and all the companies that use that have their model dependent on single-use plastics. So, and then in terms of where the potential for kind of reducing greenhouse gas emissions is greatest, I would kind of maybe advocate for really capping the production of plastics, reducing the production of plastics. So, and at the same time, trying to create the spaces for alternatives which have minimal, let's say, which contribute minimally to greenhouse gas emissions. So, which would be both bio-based, biodegradable, and not creating new problems, let's say, when they are being put forward, and you ideally embedded in the local economies, because I think that's also what we have been struggling with some of the organizations that we found. They start locally, they really think, okay, what is the kind of residue that we have here, which organizations we can connect to, how do we return the waste from our straws back to the land to regenerate the land. So they're thinking well, but then when they're starting to think about expansion, then a lot of kind of compromises might come in, and then the model becomes problematic, let's say. So yes, and adverse consequences for the workers, I guess that's something that Alice would be able to say on more, but I would say that, okay, there is a lot of problems associated with the industry and also problems for the workers in terms of the toxicity. So, and the, let's say, alternatives, including alternatives that address the plastic crisis, can create meaningful jobs that many of previous skills people had can be applied to. So, or may also new skills gained.
Okay, Alice.
Thank you. So for the question about where to focus, I mean, I think there's no one size fits all, and efforts need to be focused depending on context and depending on capacity and who you are effectively within that. So basically, you need to tackle it at various different points. I mean, I think there are a few things to be cautious of, though, with regard to focusing specifically on climate emissions. One is that many of the solutions to that are, like, for example, circular economy solutions, which are about not using raw materials, not using fossil fuels, but using recycled plastics to make more plastics through chemical recycling, are extremely bad for both toxicity and for greenhouse gas emissions. So that's one point, is that the same solution will have different consequences for the different issues, and that's something to be aware of. The other is that the plastic and petrochemical industry are very much positioning themselves as the solution to the climate crisis. So by being present in green technologies, by developing experimental things like hydrogen, they're kind of effectively being given a bit of a free pass because they're part of the solution. And so that is part of the dilemma that you kind of get locked into. So I think there's also this element of questioning solutions, not thinking that they, you know, you can't play ball at all, because of course we're all interconnected, and that's important. But that's yeah, and linked to that, carbon offsetting, yeah, ridiculous, largely because a lot of it's, you know, fictitious, and it's also about displacing troubles. You know, linked back to the other point around climate, I think, and the last point around the just transition, I think there needs to be a different ethics behind petrochemicals and plastics. And the difference between petrochemicals and plastics and climate is that there is no global mandate to get off of plastics, despite the fact that they are oil. So we're supposed to go on there's a global mandate, even if people don't agree on it, how you get there, that we're supposed to get off fossil fuels. But there's nobody saying, you know, that plastics is part of there. I mean, obviously there are some on the margins, indigenous communities and NGOs and activists and scholars, but the dominant people are not, who are in power, are not giving that mandate. And so how can you have a just transition if there's no political will or ethos or sensibility that that is where you've got to be? And so I think those we do need, so my critique of degrowth in my book is about the need to bring it together with just transition because of all the complex, difficult issues that will have uneven consequences for workers, for various communities, not just those in oil and gas and working in plastics, not just those who are, working directly in those industries, but across all of society. And absolutely, we need to tackle single-use everything as the mode, which is why it keeps going back to the need for degrowth. But ultimately, I think that's an ideological, cultural, hegemonic type of change that has to percolate, everywhere in some ways, and has to have a swell of momentum behind it, which is where I go back to the swarming metaphor. It's that it's sort of you need to have a change.
Okay, I thank you both, Ekaterina and Alice. I think it was very, very interesting and challenging. Listen to you. We got a lot of information to think about. We leave now this few minutes for the people to reach their other panels. And thank you very much. Thank you for coming here. Thank you.